Welcome to another Coffee with the Candidates. This is Nancy Winandy, CEO of Yankton Thrive. Today with us we have Fred Bender, who is running for District 18 Senate. Welcome.
Thank you, Nancy.
All right, why don't you go ahead and start by telling the viewers a little bit about yourself.
I'm a lifelong South Dakotan, with an exception of 1 year that I spent in Oregon in my mid-20s, my misspent youth. I've been a resident of District 18 for 43 years. We live here in Yankton. I'm married, have 2 children that are both grown and have left the nest. And 2 years ago, we had our first grandchild.
Well, congratulations on that. So what skills do you have that differentiate you from the other candidates?
I think there's 2 things about me or several things actually, that make me a little bit different than most candidates. One of the more relevant things, I think, is that I've actually worked about 20 different jobs in my life. So I had a long-standing career in mental health of about 40 years. I worked on a farm and farmed for close to 40 years. So obviously I did some things at the same time. But I've also been a truck driver, a dishwasher, a welder, a teacher, a research assistant, a carpenter, a construction worker. When I made a list, I came up with 20 different jobs that I had at one point in my life or another.
So do you care to share with the viewers what you do right now?
I've been a mental health, I was a farmer until about 2010, I think it is. I had a bad farm accident and crushed part of my spine, and that seemed like a good time to maybe look for something a little gentler to do. But I've also been a mental health professional for 40 years. I worked at, I started out at adolescent group home, worked at HSC, but then also operated managed and worked at a care program and impact program here in Yankton.
Wonderful. So what do you think the biggest challenge is going to be this legislative session?
I think the biggest challenge this session is the biggest challenge that they face every session, and that's to prove that state government is relevant to South Dakota citizens, that state government can do something, can take actions which will make our lives a little bit easier perhaps, a little more productive, a little more fulfilling.
So with the child care crisis in South Dakota, what ideas would you support to create growth in that business sector?
That's a hard one. Part of the issue that we run into with childcare is that we have low wages in this state. And so people that might consider doing childcare are faced with opportunities to work at McDonald's for $15 an hour instead, that kind of thing. I think one of the things that probably needs to happen is there needs to be a collaboration between Chamber of Commerce and employee groups. When people aren't able to take jobs because of childcare responsibilities, those are some of those openings that we see where the help wanted sign is up and we can't find people to fill jobs. And so this, childcare is an issue not just for the parent, it's also an issue for employers in town. And I think if we can do something that is collaborative between the two, I think that might make some progress in resolving some of that.
Yeah, last year the governor within her budget address had $100 million. Sorry about the semis driving by. I don't know if the recording is going to pick that up. But there was $100 million and 40 of that was allocated to existing daycares, and there was some challenges that came with allocating the other $60 million. So I don't know if the governor in her budget address is going to bring forward another opportunity for communities to utilize funds like that to either do startup daycares or enhance existing daycares.
It's when I went to school at South Dakota State University, the university ran a child care program as part of their training for students that were studying child development and family relations, sociology, psychology, stuff like that. It may be a possibility that advanced placement programs at our high schools might also get involved with some child care experience, which would be useful, I think, to any person that is growing up and might have a family of their own someday.
Right. And I do want to correct what I just said. I was thinking of 100 million when we were talking about housing. It's 10 million, so it was 6 million that didn't get utilized and 4 million that did get allocated. So I wanted to apologize to the people listening and not giving them accurate information.
I think we always have to be careful that we don't give an unfair advantage. You know, if you've worked very hard and started a child care facility, and you've just done it with the sweat of your brow and your own efforts, and then to come along and say, well, but we're going to give out grants to somebody else to do that. Those become difficult issues, and that's where politics really can earn its keep in resolving some of those issues.
Yes, it does become difficult, but sometimes necessary.
Sometimes necessary.
So that's why your job, if elected, does become more difficult.
I think it's particularly with childcare, though. I think this belongs to everybody. Belongs to us as citizens, whether we have children or not, or whether our children are already grown and gone, or we just never had any. It belongs to employers who are looking for employees, it just belongs to all of us.
Agreed. So what are your priority areas within the budget?
Well, I have a particular bone to pick with our rate of incarceration in South Dakota. We currently incarcerate at about 2.5 times the rate that Minnesota does, our neighbor. North Dakota's higher than Minnesota. Iowa's higher than Minnesota as well. Nebraska, I don't remember where they're at with incarceration. So we're spending a lot of money on incarceration. This year's budget, I believe, has a $600 million special allocation for a new prison in West River. When I did the math, and I'm not a mathematician, but when I did the math, if we were incarcerating per 100,000 citizens at the rate that Minnesota is, when I look at the per diem for incarcerating, that would be about a $66 million difference in this budget year. So on the one hand, I sound perhaps a lot like a Republican in terms of where can we save money. But that would be an important issue for me to bring forward. You know, why are we spending so much money on incarceration? That impacts our labor force as well. If you're sitting in prison or sitting in county jail, you're obviously not going to work. I think if we were going to look at reallocating some of those dollars, I would look towards public education and Medicaid expansion.
And Medicaid expansion is one of those items that is on the ballot this fall, so we encourage the voters to go out and become informed on that ballot item as well.
It's a 90-10 split with the federal government, so it's a pretty good deal for us as a state. All South Dakotans are my neighbors. All South Dakotans are members of my community. And so someone living 150 miles from here who doesn't have health insurance for whatever the reason, that should be a concern for me as well as whether I have health insurance.
So were there any other areas that were priorities for you within the budget?
No.
So do you have any suggestions regarding how to grow transparency within state government?
Yeah, I think if we get more balance in government, I think that will help a lot. Currently, we're way out of balance. 49% of South Dakotans are registered as Republicans, which means that 51% of South Dakotans are not. And yet 90% of the legislature and both the House and the Senate, and as well as every state office, is held by one political party. That not only means that some things don't get talked about a lot because, we're all on the same team, but it also lends itself to some corruption that can occur. And that corruption can be either covert or overt. And some of the issues we're dealing with right now with the governor and issues that we dealt with our attorney general not long ago were pretty overt. But then there are also covert ways that we can become corrupted in a sense. The House committee that met on the Ravensburg or the Attorney General's case initially came out of committee and saying, no, we're fine. We don't need to do anything with this. And luckily the House took another look at that as a whole and decided, yeah, we do need to do something with this. And so that issue of having one political party basically have a monopoly in a state is going to be an issue no matter which party it is. And so the more balanced our parties are, the more robust the discussions will be, and the more open people will be with information.
So if the political party split is 49-51, essentially, why do you think more Democrats aren't elected then out of the districts?
I think it's a mindset. We see ourselves as a Republican state, and I think people just assume that Republicans will win, and I think it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. That people that aren't interested in voting for that Republican just don't go to the polls, thinking, well, it won't make any difference, they're going to win anyway.
And I had never heard that was the breakdown in
It's 49-51. Now, 51% are not Democrats. That's Democrats, Libertarians, Green Party. I don't know what's all out there, but yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about sports gaming right now, which is allowed in Deadwood. Would you support modifications to allow for utilization of online betting, such as an app through your cell phone?
I'd want to see more particulars on it, but more than likely I would not fight that. Government has never been good at fighting vices that we have. And in my life, I see gambling as a vice. I see cigarette smoking as a vice. I see alcohol use as a vice. I drink too much coffee. That's a vice I have. Some people eat more than they should. That's a vice they have. So, but I don't think government's ever been particularly helpful at reducing our vices. So whether it's gambling or alcohol sales or whatever, I don't see much difference there.
So at this time, there's approximately 700 jobs open in Yankton County and about 30,000 across the entire state. How aggressive should the state be in recruiting new Americans to South Dakota, or even people from other areas of the country into South Dakota?
A friend of mine told me that, a pretty knowledgeable friend, that we've never regained our state population that we had in 1930. 1930, we were, if I recall, we were at about 1.3 million people. I believe we're at 850,000 now, somewhere around there. So we can add a lot of people to South Dakota before we're going to start feeling crowded. In terms of workforce recruitment, had a bit of an epiphany a week ago. I tend to see the problems in Texas and Arizona as problems for Texas and Arizona, but after all, they are part of my community as well. We're all in this together. And so not only do we need workforce here, but some of the southern states could use some help in managing the migrants that are coming there. And so rather than shunning that and saying, oh no, we don't want anything to do with them, we don't need those people up here, those are exactly the people we probably need up here. We all came in as, every ethnic group in this country came in as a migrant at some point, or a new immigrant. If it was the Irish, it was the Italians, it was Norwegians, it was Germans, it was, you name it. And so, yeah, we're a melting pot. We're a multicultural country. We just are. And so when I look at new South Dakota citizens that I see here, people that I didn't see when I was a kid, they are some of the hardest working people I see. I don't know that we would have a roof shingled in Yankton County if it wasn't for migrant labor and immigrants that have come to our country.
So do you think that a state office should help manage the immigration policy or helping refugees or asylees, or do you think that's best left to the nonprofit sector, to groups such as Lutheran Social Services?
I think probably both. I think the last thing we need are representatives of our state government saying nasty things about immigrants and migrants and who belongs in South Dakota and who doesn't belong in South Dakota. Years ago, I heard a phrase one time, and I won't be able to say it exactly the way I heard it, but that the problem for Native Americans were that they had a poor immigration policy 400 years ago. And And I would guess there's a number of Native Americans that would probably still feel that way.
So how do you plan to work with your fellow elected officials and lobbyists with all the strong opinions on both sides of an issue?
Well, I spent 40 years working with seriously and persistently mentally ill.
Which might be the end of the statement right there.
Which might be the end of the statement right there. I guess, hopefully I learned a lot of skills on how to work with people. I think I learned a lot of skills about what motivates people to either change behavior or not change behavior. No one sets out to fail. Everybody sets out to succeed. I don't see someone with a different opinion than me as my enemy. I don't automatically assume that they're wrong and I'm right. That experience in working with mental health, I think, is very valuable to try to work within a political framework. On a humorous side, I would probably be the only mental health professional in the South Dakota legislature, and I've thought for a number of years that they should probably have one embedded there because, you know, just keep an eye on things. You never know when someone needs to seek a safe environment.
Have a consultation.
Have a consultation, yeah. I'm well aware of how to do those, and I know how to fill out the paperwork.
So how will you communicate with your constituents to get input on those initiatives that you'll be dealing with?
Well, I'm active in my community. I'm active in my church. I get out a lot. I think I am a person that is open to listening to what other people have to say. My work in mental health had a whole lot more to do with listening than it did to do with talking. I would also be open to looking for, and I would have to get a hold of someone younger than myself, but I assume that there are some internet ways of utilizing the internet that would also help with getting feedback. I'm a firm believer in representative democracy. I don't think as a legislator, whether in the House or the Senate, I'm there to make decisions for South Dakotans or for people of my district. I'm there to reflect the decisions and the goals and the dreams that they already have.
So what needs to be done for the $150 million allocated to South Dakota Housing Development Authority for housing last session to be utilized by communities? And for the listening viewers, there was actually $200 million allocated to South Dakota Housing. $50 million of that was ARPA money. That is available and being distributed right now through a process. It's mostly for sewer infrastructure projects, which is great to create affordable housing lots, but there's still another $150 million that was kind of caught up in the rules and has not yet been allocated. So do you have any ideas or any insight on what we might be able to do for that?
Not a lot, outside of that there are a lot of marginal houses, whether in towns or in a city like Yankton, or in our rural areas that can probably be renovated to create affordable housing. There's a process called a TIF, tax incremental financing, which my understanding is used only by large developers, but perhaps should be made available to individual home buyers or home purchasers to use to reclaim some of the housing that we watch year after year kind of just fall down.
So let's talk a little bit about another vice, marijuana. So Yankton opened its first medical dispensary within the city limits. What are your thoughts on recreational dispensaries?
Well, if we pass the initiative this fall, then I assume that will be that will take place. A friend of mine who's an ardent Republican, he said, "Oh, you pass marijuana, it's going to be everywhere." And I said, "Well, it can't get any more widespread than alcohol is already, I don't think, because I tried to add up how many places in Yankton you can buy alcohol, whether that's beer or liquor or wine. And I think I stopped counting around 20, but you know, there are an awful lot of places that alcohol is available. Marijuana as a drug, I have never understood our fascination with that and with our pursuit of it. The amount of money that we spend on interdiction, prosecution, legal services, incarceration, lost productivity, damage to families. The drug itself doesn't justify that, just doesn't. I guess we could make coffee illegal. We can make caffeine illegal too, because that's a psychogenic drug as well. Nicotine is a psychogenic drug. We could make tobacco illegal. If it is passed even if the initiative isn't passed, I would encourage the legislature to look at ways to legalize it and regulate it and tax it versus spending money on it. Because I don't know how much money we're spending on it currently, but if our incarceration rate is 2.5 times that of Minnesota. The opponent in my race, when I asked her about it at a meeting I was at, she said, well, if we legalize marijuana, then that number will go down. And she was right, because we don't have 2.5 times the incarceration rate because we have 2.5 times as many murderers in South Dakota. We're just locking people up for things that probably could have been dealt with otherwise. And there are programs to work with drug and alcohol addiction that are much more effective than incarceration.
So is there anything you want to share with the viewers today that was not a part of the previously asked questions?
Oh, so much.
Now's your chance.
Now's my chance. I'm kind of fascinated, I am fascinated by our chronic problems in South Dakota. And chronic problems that I have known since I was a child. And so we have this thing called a brain drain, we have too many high school and college graduates that leave our state. We have, I think it's the 2 poorest counties in the country, of any state in the country. And we're also in the bottom third of per capita income in the country. And so all 3 of those should be addressed, I believe. Every Native American is my brother or sister, just as much as every white person out there or Hispanic person is my brother and sister. They're my neighbors. And so I would really like to look for ways to deal with some of those chronic problems. When it comes to the brain drain, perhaps we can look at, a person here in the community suggested to me that maybe we should have a policy where South Dakota residents that attend South Dakota universities and stay in our state after graduation can have some loan forgiveness based on the number of years that they stay in South Dakota. So there are some avenues that we could look at to deal with some of this stuff. The Native American issues, I believe, are huge, and we need to address those and be aggressive in how we address those, obviously in collaboration with them. I think, if I remember right, they were the last group that were given voting rights in our country. At some point we decided that Native Americans were also citizens of our state and our country, and perhaps they should have a voice in who represents them as well. We also are on this one I think is huge. Whether as individuals we believe the science of climate change or not doesn't really matter. The world is moving in that direction. Our country is moving in that direction. Industry is moving in that direction. Various car companies are saying, by another 10 years we're not going to produce gas-powered cars, they're all going to be electric cars. The question becomes, where does electricity come from? And so if you're just generating the electricity with fossil fuels, then you're not really solving anything. South Dakota is probably, within North America, South Dakota is probably in the exact right place to most capitalize on wind and solar. We have years when it doesn't rain here, and it's hard to raise a crop, but the wind always blows, and the sun always shines. And I looked up what the average return on an acre of solar cells is, a yearly return on an acre of solar cells, and based on national average of how much your utility company gives you credit for, because there's some difference across the nation, but I believe all cooperatives are required to buy back electricity. It's about $12,000 an acre. Now, I'm renting out some farm ground for about $150 an acre, so about 8 times the revenue, the return of revenue on solar cells versus corn and soybeans. Now, I know that the inputs are different, but I also know that corn and soybeans have to be planted every year, and I don't know what the lifespan is on wind turbines, or on solar cells, but I imagine it's much longer. We have in our state, we have one of the premier producers of wind turbine towers, Marmot Manufacturing, up by Sioux Falls north.
Terex?
Yeah, is considered to be one of the best, or one of the preeminent producers of solar towers in the United States. When I did an online search for the turbine manufacturers, I found none in the United States. There are companies that sell the turbines, but they're turbines that they buy from overseas. And so we have a great manufacturing opportunity there as well, to begin to manufacture, to become a leader in turbine manufacturing. So we have some great opportunities there, and we are in exactly the right place for wind and solar. We also have good hydroelectric with a major river that runs from our northern border to our southern border. We also have the ethanol industry, which is producing renewable energy. And so I think that for farmers, I think to look beyond just farming the soil. A farmer will say that they create wealth by growing a crop. And that's probably true. Of course, it's facilitated by Mother Nature. Well, we can also, so we're farming the land, we can also farm the sun and the wind and the rivers and use those as means of economic development within our state. I think the state plays a significant role in moving forward with that in terms of financing and creating transmission lines, things like that that are needed for that industry to really burgeon within our state. I would like to see 2 things. I'm a fan of X Prizes. I don't know if you're familiar with X Prizes. X Prizes were 15 years ago maybe. Someone started an X Prize, and they offered a prize for whoever could produce a car that got 100 miles to the gallon. And so a number of teams did that, and someone won. And they had an X Prize on space flight, and I think SpaceX probably won that one. And so I would encourage us to have a competition among our high school, maybe even grade school and college groups to calculate what our energy consumption is in South Dakota, total energy consumption. Not just electricity, but also petroleum, everything we use. And then to set a goal that we are going to produce as much energy as a state that we use. Part of what that does is it gives our children a reason to live here. It's something exciting for them to kind of grab a hold of and say, okay, why do I want to stay in South Dakota? Are we just a conservative state that is never doing anything progressive? We're always going to be the last one to get on board with anything. South Dakota was the last state in the nation that required driver's licenses. 1954, I think it is. Everybody else had done it. We finally got around to doing it. So are we the state that doesn't do exciting things, or can we become a state that does exciting things? And frankly, for a state like South Dakota to say, you know what, we're going to produce as much energy as we consume. We're going to use all these various methods. We're going to try to make it as ecologically sound as we can. But that's the goal we're going to have. I think that's exciting.
That would be exciting. So Fred, thank you for joining me today. And as a reminder, voting is available for you right now with the absentee process. Or if you're interested in voting in person, Tuesday, November 8th is the date. And as a reminder, there is one spot in District 18 Senate, and it is Gene Hunoff and Fred Bender. that are battling it out for that job.
I
So
guess.
thank you very much for putting your name in the hat, and good luck.
You bet. Thank you.